Thank you. I think that I'm definitely going to respond to that, but both for the response to the question as well as some of the 2, 3 other things that I have to say. Just as framing for context, I think there is a lot of rhetoric in data governance on how important the user is, why this is all for the users, everything is on behalf of the users. But there is this presumptive belief that either the state or quasi-private entities or certain private entities blessed by the state can do that job for the user better than what the user themselves can. And I think that that's something that is in particular happening in India, and we've seen that happen over the last couple of years, but it's also something that is happening all over the world. And I think that at the end of the day, if we look at things from the lens of the user, it's very clear that this notional idea of development or of security being mutually exclusive to the idea of privacy is a myth. And that needs to be questioned, and laws and regulations need to be framed in that context, right? So I mean, I think keeping that context in mind and looking at data like sharing, specifically on the LEA aspect, I think it's quite clear that the current framework of cross-border data flows, at least right now in India, completely being open, anything can go anywhere, largely speaking, is the fact that the way that law enforcement agencies need to currently access data is broken, if it's not within the territory of of the country, and sometimes even if it is within the territory of India, it's fundamentally broken. So it's very clear that the mutual legal assistance treaty system via which normally you'd go about trying to get all of this information has to change and needs to be reformed. There are various proposals that people are looking at all over the world. I mean, there's the Cloud Act in the United States of America, which sort of is a sort of regime where one country certifies the other, then you can make direct requests. There's the e-evidence directive in the EU that just failed recently, but in a sense, I think tries to say that if we ask for data and you're providing services to our citizens or to our subjects, you just need to give that data to us. We don't really care how you do it, which is why it failed. But I think that regardless of all of these things, what we are actually seeing in practice is this notional belief that data localization will actually solve it. That the fact that if data is actually physically present within the territory of a country, or if there's a mirrored copy of it physically present within the country, you can actually get access to that data. And that's simply not how technical systems work. That's not how encryption works. Architecturally, many of these things are really difficult to do. And I think that there are better measures available that both the government as well as the private sector need to work together in order to solve the problem. And that solution is, I think, going to go a long way in order to solve the question of trust. Because I think specifically on trust, it's the notional idea of surveillance. And if one presumes that right now, with the surveillance infrastructure that we have within the country in terms of legal protections, I mean, there are statistics that say that under the telecom interception rules where like surveillance currently takes place, there is a lot of data to prove that there are about 48,000, I think, requests on an average every 2 months that the team that has to review these requests goes through, and it's impossible to see how there's application of mind actually taking place. So it's important for us to reform that. On the economic front and this entire notional idea of non-personal data, I mean, I think that we need to be a little careful on this idea of forced data transfers, because at the end of the day, nationalizing data sets and making sure that either the state or certain entities approved by the state gets access to the data may not necessarily be in user interest. It would have very serious like intellectual property and otherwise general interoperability concerns. And at the end of the day, the benefit that this may actually give to the user is something that is questionable. For example, just imagine for non-personal data, if, say, from an e-commerce platform, you're able to obtain the top 100 products that are sold in a particular city, and you can see from that product list what the top 3 religious objects are and what are the pin codes where those religious objects are delivered to the most. This is aggregated, high-level, non-personal data. But if this information is actually made available to everyone at that stage, it's actually deeply problematic, because in a sense what it's doing is it allows for discrimination, it allows for exclusion, and it's really important that the frameworks that exist under privacy laws as well as generally anti-discrimination laws actually also apply to questions of non-personal data. And I think including it in the data protection bill tries to sort of really short-circuit this entire question when it's clearly a question of another independent law. So I think that covers both the LEA bit and the economic bit and the informed sort of like improvements that we as a country can make. And I think that the final comment that I really wanted to make was around this notional idea of like competition and monopolization that's generally taking place. It's very clear that I think monopolization has already taken place, and some of the harms of this monopolization are also already starting to manifest themselves. Specifically in competition law, I think interoperability and openness with regard to standards, where you can actually prove certain things are taking place in a certain way, where you can audit systems in order to make sure that the user's privacy is being protected, are really the only real way that we can continue to operate sort of as a market economy and also allow for the protection of privacy in a really sort of effective way to take place. So if we believe that privacy is a fundamental right, we can't equate it to things like gold and uranium and various precious metals that are priced in a global market. We need to treat it like it deserves.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Udbhav. You know,